Are we in a trade war? I hear routinely from defenders of the president that we're not, but I also hear from him that we've already lost the trade war, or if we engage in one, they're easy to win, but that we've then lost. It switches back and forth a lot. So I'm just gonna lay out the facts from the past week, and then we're gonna discuss, try to figure out what the current state of our trade policy with China is. So earlier this week, the US announced new tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods, claiming that China is stealing US intellectual property. Although to be fair, US scientists have stolen the Chinese hoax of global warming, so I guess we've gotten a little bit back for our money. So the US threatened to levy import taxes on more than 1,300 Chinese products, including TVs, dishwashers, and printers, also aircraft and chemicals and automobiles. And so in turn, China vowed to target key US exports, including soybeans, but also interestingly, Levi's, whiskey, and Harley Davidsons, amongst others. And so that amounted to about $50 billion worth of tariffs on US goods. So great, both of our economies are gonna be doing much better as a result of 50 billion one way, 50 billion the other way. And so Donald Trump saw that and said, in light of China's unfair retaliation, I've instructed the US trade representative to consider whether $100 billion of additional tariffs would be appropriate. That came late last evening. And so the Chinese heard about it though. And they said this: if the United States disregards the opposition of China and the international community and insists on unilateralist and protectionist trade practices, the Chinese side will follow through to the end and will not hesitate to fight back at any cost. Ministry spokesman Gao Feng said, we are prepared and have already formulated very detailed countermeasures. So we put tariffs on them and they put them back on us, and so we doubled down on them, and now they seem to be prepared to do the same to us, which is an interesting situation to be in. I think academics have a term for that. But anyway, why don't we go to a little bit of the president defending this recent move, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion.
We have a trade deficit, depending on the way you calculate, of $504 billion. Now, some people would say it's really $375 billion. In particular with China, we're going to be doing a Section 301 trade action. It could be about $60 billion, but that's really just a fraction of what we're talking about. I've asked them to reduce the trade deficit immediately by $100 billion. It's a lot. So that would be anywhere from 25%, depending on the way you figure, to maybe something even more than that, but we have to do that.
So we're doing that.
Okay, my favorite parts, so much fun here, until of course the trade war actually begins, and then not fun for anyone. So first of all, he says, there's a trade deficit of 500 billion, some say 375 billion. You know why some say that? Because that's the real number. He had earlier said $500 billion, so that's why they told him, hey knucklehead, you got it wrong for the billionth time in a row. So he's like, well, it's still 500. But I'm saying some say 375 billion. So that was a fun part. And then another fun part was after they do these round of tariff threats, they say, in light of China's unfair retaliation, as John read to you. But wait, we struck first. Now look, don't get me wrong, China does a lot of things, manipulation of their currency, and they do attack our intellectual property, etc. And as a lot of people in politics are rightfully pointing out, there are smart ways to address that. This is not among them, right? But when we go out and go, we will be doing tariffs on you, 50 billion, then 100 billion, right? And they retaliate, you can't then cry about it and go, that is such unfair retaliation, I can't believe they did that. That is the most believable thing in the world. Of course they're gonna retaliate. That's kind of how this stuff works. And the fact that he, as usual, couldn't see it coming is hilarious and depressing. And then I like China's quote. They said that they will, quote, counterattack with great strength. My guess is they said it that way so to get Trump's attention. They know the knuckleheads, you're either weak or you're strong. You either lose or you win. So they're like, we're coming at you with great strength. He's like, oh no.
Well, he also said that $100 billion. It just like, I can't help it. It makes me think of Austin Powers, the way that he pronounces the number, because it feels unreal, because that's the way, unfortunately, everything is when you have a president who acts like a petulant child, right? And makes everything a tit for tat, wants to wag his stick and show who has the largest one. And then, like you guys pointed out, if these policies go into effect, if they're implemented, it's the American voters who actually helped put him into office that are going to be hurting from it. People who work in agriculture, people who work in manufacturing and production. And it's a lose-lose, for either side. Our two economies are so interconnected and interdependent, but that's what you get when everybody wants to play around with words and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars.
I think it's actually even worse than that. So as a financial person, before I ran for Congress, he's sitting here talking about what he's planning to do. There are ways that we could effectively improve our situation nationally in our trade deals. We definitely need to renegotiate all of them, ensuring that people internationally are also protected, as well as the interest of America as far as being able to regulate these deals as well. But the one thing that I found most ridiculous about his tantrum that he threw over this deal was that he failed to even talk about another source of our economy that's being outsourced, and that's through our own American companies that he just gave a huge tax break to. And pretty much just gave them, you know what, we'll just make you pay a minimum tax to bring all that offshore money back into the United States when they're able to profit off of wages in countries of people that are not livable, that are being detrimentally affected. And yet we are not really addressing that problem within our own country. And then he's going and doing this extreme measure in other countries, and yet rewarding American companies that are not keeping their jobs here in America. So it's very, it's just being a hypocrite to me.
So let me double down on that and give even a little bit more context. So why? Why is he doing that? So there is the right way to do it, which is, for example, I'm against the TPP, and the reason for that is that it gives multinational corporations sovereignty over our laws and other countries' laws. It's not that we're against free trade; it's that we want it to be on behalf of the citizens, not on behalf of corporations, and there's a giant difference. The reason Donald Trump can't say that, the reality of the situation, even though he knows that that is popular position, that's why he took it during the campaign. He can't say it because those corporations are his donors.
Yeah.
So that's why he's got to say, oh, I'm going to take on China, because saying he's going to take on multinational corporations is not going to play well in raising funding for his campaign and the Republican campaigns overall.
Yeah.
And the right way to do it would be through a series of countermeasures where then you force China to react to you publicly, and that makes them the bad guy. And yes, it does matter, because it matters and how the rest of the world reacts, Europe, et cetera. That's a strategic way of handling it. The second reason why Trump says it so brashly and openly is because he doesn't care about doing it the right way. Of course, partly because he's not bright enough, but the other reason is so that he can take credit. It's about politics. I was tough with China. Now, was that the best strategy? No. But it helped him politically, because with his knucklehead voters, they're like, oh, he went like this to China, and I noticed that, and so he must be a tough guy.
But I hate to interrupt you for a moment, but Cenk, you and I have talked about this before too, that I feel the same way with with Russia when people bring it up, is that's the way our politics works, is unfortunately we are so focused on optics, and you just want somebody to act tough and say that they were tough, and so nobody actually thinks through policy, what it's going to mean, what the consequences or repercussions of it might be. It's all about whether you stood tough and talked tough or not. Yeah. And I think that kind of spreads all around. And so, let's think about how shallow we can be a lot of the time.
Yeah, and he doesn't, he's been talking about China and our trade deficit with them since back during the election, and he's been talking about tariffs, and that was one of the things I was worried about when he became president, was he talked about tariffs like this. And I still, after all this time, I don't think he actually knows what the trade deficit actually represents.
No way.
He thinks it's just a measure of competition and not a reflection of our industries, which change over time. And in terms of arithmetic, I find it frustrating, because he seems to think it's too big, it needs to be smaller. How much smaller? Well, he's proposed $150 billion smaller. But he originally thought it was $500 billion, and now he seems to accept it's $375 billion. That's almost exactly how much smaller he thought it needed to be. So why are we going through this whole process? And one thing I would like is, there's been a lot of news coverage of this today, and the analogy that everyone's got, if we had the technology, we'd do one of those John Oliver style things of everybody saying it, is that he's engaged in a game of chicken with China, and he refuses to swerve. But he's not engaged in a game of chicken, because in a game of chicken, you risk yourself. he's not risking himself. If it crashes, it's the economy that crashes, not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is gonna be just fine. His voters could be ruined. They could lose their industries, they could lose their houses and all of that. But he's gonna be fine. So stop acting like he's being brash and bold. You can be very bold with other people's money. That's easy.
Well, he's done that his whole life. And I like to end on two more fun quotes. Larry Kudlow, who is talking head on television, nothing wrong with that per se, but it should not be.
I hate them personally.
But not necessarily the right position, right person for the position of National Economic Advisor to the president. Anyway, that's what he is now. He's always been for free trade and against tariffs. Now, because he's working under the thumb of Donald Trump, he's like, yeah, tariffs, good idea. And he actually had a huge fight the other day with one of the Fox Business hosts that he used to be friends with. Anyway, he wrote, or he said, trying to explain this away, we're not running a trade war. Nothing's happened. Nothing has been executed. There's no there yet, but there will be. In other words, trying to split the baby. Like, don't panic, markets. Markets, don't panic. There's no trade war. But Donald Trump, don't fire me, because there will be. Trust me, there will be. But there isn't. But there will be. But there isn't. So, but again, for any Trump advisor, and I can't stand Larry Kudlow, but any Trump advisor I feel bad for, because it's an impossible job.
Yeah.
You have to somehow try to make sure the world doesn't explode while your boss is trying to make it explode. And finally, if you don't believe us, maybe you'll believe a deeply right-wing Republican from Nebraska, classy Ben Sasse. Okay, he said about the sanctions, this is the tariffs, I should say, the dumbest possible way to do this. That's a direct quote. He said, hopefully the president is just blowing off steam again, but if he's even half serious, this is nuts. And added, China is guilty of many things, but the president has no actual plan to win right now. He's threatening to light American agriculture on fire.
If you like this video, bless your heart. We got a lot more where that came from. We do a full show every day, Monday through Friday. Come enjoy it ad-free by becoming a member, tytnetwork.com/join.